Prep Aussie here. I hope you're all well in whatever part of the world you're watching this video. Today is Monday, the 26th of the 3rd, 2018, and the time here now is 09:15 AM Australian Eastern Standard Time. Folks, I have a real treat for you today. David Morgan is back to enlighten us on the recent financial woes of the world, and to enlighten us, hopefully, and give us some vital information as regards to what's happening in the world. David is one of the preeminent economists, macroeconomics in the world, so I'm sure you'll enjoy listening to what he's got to say. G'day, David. Thank you for coming back. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being back, and I wouldn't say lead. I would say on the alternative side, I don't know if I'm leading in the world, but certainly I've made a mark on the alternative thinking, non-Keynesian view of economics. But anyway, thanks for the introduction.
Non-Keynesian is probably the best way to go at the moment, if everyone understands that. Okay, David. As people are starting slowly to understand, in the pre-interview, you and I were talking, and we were saying that, conversations that I've had with people lately is just how do people like yourself work in the current environment of just total manipulation and fraud, to the extent that no one, like just a layman like myself, I just cannot understand how the system is actually staying as it is, to use a better term. I can't understand it. I was speaking to a financial bloke yesterday, a good friend of mine, and he said he just cannot for the life of him understand how the markets are working, and for that matter, all the periphery items that come off the market. So would you like to just enlighten us how the markets are actually working, how they're being manipulated, and how you guys like yourself actually work within that environment to get it right on your side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'll try to paint it with a broad brush, but basically it's a bunch of machines talking to a bunch of machines. I mean, what you really have is these massive computer banks that are just, milliseconds off of the exchange itself, the New York Stock Exchange as an example. And they basically slice, the order into 1,000 pieces, so to speak, which means that they get an advantage of several milliseconds over the next machine. I mean, it's really bizarre when you think about it. So a lot of it has to do with machines talking to each other and basically swapping information back and forth and making these fractions of fractions of fractions of pennies. But you do that over and over again, and with the amount of product that's exchanged in any given day, on not only the stock exchange, but the currency markets, the commodities markets, the ETFs, and everything else. It amounts to massive profits for these companies that basically have what's called a one-up on everybody else. So how does a retail, or let's say a more boutique kind of an environment, such as myself and many others, handle that? And the answer is you just go back to basics, and you can't compete at that level, nor do I wish to. So basically, I teach, as you well know, the fundamentals of why we're in such a mess, and then what you can do about it. And I start at the very basics, which means that, to start off, one, you have to have a clear understanding of the problem. And a lot of people still to this day do not. But the problem is that you can't print wealth. I mean, if you could print wealth, then you'd be able to, take this $100 trillion Zimbabwe note, and you'd be the richest country in the world, But what happened? The currency failed. And Zimbabwe, under Mugabe, which is now deceased, became from a very prosperous nation to a very poor nation. And it wasn't the people, and it wasn't the land, it wasn't the natural resources. It had to do with living a lie, which is that you couldn't print wealth, and you can't. So that pours over in the United States, which is the reserve currency of the world. And here, the United States has been doing the same thing, but at a different rate. And in many cases, a slower rate than, let's say, Zimbabwe or Argentina or any of these other currencies that have gone to the dustbin of history just from like 1990. And what they do in most of these countries is they rely on the U.S. dollar. So the dollar is the de facto go-to piece of paper in a lot of these countries that accelerate their inflationary bias, and also the official reserve currency of the world. So it's king dollar. The problem is that it can only be king of the mountain for so long, because eventually everybody catches on, and it's the old emperor has no clothes. At some point, your trading partners or the public at large or both see it for what it is. It's like they're never going to get fiscally responsible. They're just going to print to the moon. And I'm going to cash out now because I don't trust where the dollar is going to be, 6 months from now. And then it becomes, I don't trust where the dollar is going to be 6 weeks from now. And then it gets to be, I don't trust the dollar is going to be 6 days from now. And then it's going to be 6 minutes from now and 6 seconds from now. Once it hits that psychology, look out, it's over. Now, will the U.S. dollar go the way of the Zimbabwe currency? I doubt it. But I think for all practical purposes, we will see an acceleration in the trust of the dollar, meaning that it's distrusted more and more at an accelerating rate. The only thing that can fix it really is, well, there's a couple things, but one of them is to write down the debt to some level that can be handled, which is very unlikely. And the other way is it's basically live within your means, which I don't think will happen either. So I think we're destined for all of the recorded monetary history. Every time that a currency has been non-backed, the inflationary route is the one that was taken. So we're pretty well assured that will happen.
Okay, mate. Let's just once. All right, mate. Well, I've written. In my videos, I got an absolute huge kickback and blowback off comments a couple of weeks ago because I said Donald Trump can only do one or two things: either inflate the actual deficit, or completely write it off. And the reason I said that is because geopolitical events would lead me to think that it's either, there's no other way he can do it. He can either inflate it or he can actually wipe out the whole debt. And the reason I am thinking that he will do that is because, in my mind, he's having a game of brinkmanship at the moment with the world elites and the cabal sort of thing, the secret state, the deep state. So my guess is that he would actually say, you know what, everyone's going back to nothing tomorrow. Is that feasible, or do you think it's more in line with the inflation, or just inflating the budget more and more? That's it probably looks that way after they did the omnibus bill, but do you think that that's the way it's going to go, instead of just Donald Trump going on TV on a Friday and saying, well, folks, look, as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, we're writing everybody's debts off. Our debt's written off. We can't pay it back. And on Monday, we start from a new clean sheet. And as Bill Holder said, a debt jubilee type of event.
Well, it's very thought-provoking. And, I'll sit here, and Bill and I are pretty good friends, as you know. I mean, I'd love to think that could take place. It could, yeah. I can't rule it out. I'm too open-minded to say no. You'd have to install basically another currency system, because all that money isn't owed to the United States. The United States borrowed it all. So who they borrow it from? Well, everyone looks at you knows that they borrowed it from a banking cartel called the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve are basically private bankers that own the debt, and it's owed to them. They're the ones that hold this carrot over the entire population of the United States, and for all practical purposes, the entire world, because, as I said a moment ago, the reserve currency of the world is the U.S. dollar. So what you'd have to do is you would have to have in place, before you made that announcement, that you were going to go to, let's say, a United States note, which would be a treasury bill printed by the Treasury and not printed by, well, the Federal Reserve note is actually printed by the Treasury. I don't need any academics telling me where I'm wrong. They love to do that.
Yeah.
But a private bank note, which says Federal Reserve note on it, no longer exists. And that Monday, when the banks reopen, that everything would be a United States Treasury note, and that your bank account would stay, the same, and except it wouldn't be in Federal Reserve notes anymore. It would be in U.S. Treasury notes. I mean, that's one way to do it. It's very complicated. However, you ask, how does Zimbabwe do it in Argentina? All these countries fail. Of course, as I explained a moment ago, they actually go to the U.S. dollar as the way to circumvent their currency failing. You couldn't really go to gold. It's not widespread enough. And so, again, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, it's something I actually discussed this on another interview fairly recently. I mean, it sounds rather bizarre, but it absolutely will be done one way or the other. I mean, there's other, subtleties we could argue. You could do it, there's a twist on one or the other. I like your thinking because it's this way or that. There's something in the middle, but I don't want to mess with that. So you basically own it, so you can't pay it back. We owe these nasty bankers. They've taken advantage of it. I'm putting us back on our own currency. Now, when we do this, and put in quotation marks. This is really going to happen.
Yeah.
Very much out. But Kennedy tried the same thing, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. And when he went to the U.S. note, they are printed, and they were circulated to some extent. But that and other things, in my opinion, and no one knows the absolute answer, was the one of many reasons why he lost his life. But whenever you mess with the bankers, you seem to be short-lived. They have a monopoly. They're not going to give it up. They're willing to kill for it. That's been proven throughout history. And so for someone like a Donald J. Trump to actually pull it off would be sort of a first time in history, really. But it certainly is a pleasant thing to think about, that we could have a debt jubilee. The other hand is what we talked about, and that is just inflate until the currency is no longer accepted. And then what usually happens would be like a Bretton Woods 2, where all the bankers get together behind the scenes, or maybe out in the open with the major nations of the world. Let's say the G20. Everybody gets a place at the table, and they get to vote. What are we going to do? Or you can let it collapse, and there's another option, which would be like the special drawing rights that Jim Rickards has talked about over and over again, which is a possibility to just switch the SDR. But all these transitions would probably be painful to the populace at large, and it would not necessarily instill any confidence whatsoever at all, which means that a lot of people would, pretty much give up or could give up on the system at large. So it's very complicated as far as how do you resolve it. And yet, the facts have shown throughout all of recorded history that the markets have a way of resolving it on their own. If the people do nothing, eventually the market will say, I don't trust this dollar. And like I said a moment ago, at some point the psychology becomes, I'd rather have a jar of Skippy peanut butter than this $25 bill. And then it becomes rather a jar of Skippy peanut butter than this $250 bill. Because some guy, an hour ago paid $200 for one, and they're running out of them on the shelves. I mean, that kind of thing. Will that happen in the U.S.? Again, I doubt it, but I do see the.
Well, folks, just want to show you this chart, which is classified as a scary parallel between the 1929-30 crash and how the chart is working at the moment. And you can see from the red to the black that in actual fact, you can actually overlay it and it would just about be a complete layover. Like it's that perfect just about. Now, we've obviously moved on a bit since then because this goes up to 2013, 2014. So the comparisons, I can't find one that does a comparison at the moment. I tried Fred and a few others, but I couldn't find one. So I just wanted to point out to you that this is how things are working. And I will say after 14, it took off. So that red line you're looking at goes way past 400. It just took off. And now we're seeing the markets crashed last Friday, and they will be crashing again today somewhat. There may be a blip, but I'm not 100% confident in that. A little bit. You mentioned, Germany, Venezuela, Argentina, all these countries had a similar problem to the current Western world problem. When did these countries understand, or when do you think they understood that there was a problem, that they weren't getting out of it? And you can only paper over the cracks so far. So we'll take Argentina, for example. Now, as far as my memory serves me, this has happened to them twice recently. And it's happening again now in Argentina, like things are just starting to skyrocket and all this sort of stuff. So when do these emerging markets realise that they've got a problem, and they realise that, they just can't fix this problem?
And they learn about it when it's too late. It's too late. If you go back to the Argentina crisis in 2000, basically they said they did a twist on the old story of closing the bank or bank run. So what they said, everybody, as of Monday, banks are closed. But don't worry, all the money that you have in the bank is still there. However, what we're going to do is we're only going to allow you to take out, $300 equivalent in Argentine pesos per week. So you can be a millionaire, you can be a billionaire, it doesn't matter. You're only allowed to take out $300 per week. So, but your money's still there. Well, this put the people in complete devastation in a lot of cases because they couldn't make their mortgage payment. All they could do is not pay their electric bill and buy groceries. And this is the kind of shenanigans that these banks can pull. But when do they become aware of it? They almost always become aware of it after it's too late to do anything about it. That's why the old adage, rather be 6 years too early than 6 minutes too late applies, and I extended that, 6 months too early than 6 minutes. Because once it happens and everybody starts, either the bank closes or they do some kind of currency control that I just described, or some other event, most people are clueless until, and even in hyperinflation, it's too late usually because there's some early adopters that realize that, this currency is going to become worthless here pretty quick. So they start to do what I described, buy peanut butter, to buy anything that has value or hold its value. It could be food, canned food, it could be toilet paper, it could be shovels, it could be rakes, it could be garden implements, it could be almost anything, as long as they're getting rid of that piece of paper. And once that psychology takes hold, then it catches very, very quickly. So most people cannot protect themselves. That's why people like me that have been kind of, what would you say, not establishment, that's for sure, but not extremist either, say that you absolutely must require yourself to have like a 10% holding in physical metal, or maybe up to 20%. And this is because you want to have it before the crisis hits. So, that's the answer. It sounds like kind of a smart-ass answer. I don't swear often, but it is because it's true. Most people are clueless up until the day. It's like, you'll get, it's a conspiracy theorist. Oh, that's the past. It can't happen here. The government will protect us. The bank has federal deposit insurance. No, there's all these deniers. There's all this normalcy bias. Tomorrow's going to be exactly like today, or maybe even a little bit better. We got the right politician in office, or any of this stuff. It's total nonsense after it happens. And it's one of my favorite expressions, Prep, and that is, once the ship is sunk, everyone knows how it might have been saved. And this is where you got to look after yourself and your family. You've got to have something put back. Doesn't mean all gold, all silver, all food. It means think about the reality that we're living in and take appropriate prep. That's what your whole channel is about. It's not like you got to put everything into it. We still go to work. We still assume that the best is yet to come. But, it's pretty bleak when you take off the rose-colored glasses and take a hard look at reality.
Well, that's a good point. And I just want to point out to people, we're not trying to foster an environment of anxiety, or, you know, we're not trying to foster a doom and gloom scenario here. You know, if it was doom and gloom, you know, David would be saying to you, go out now and buy gold and silver, you know, because no, what if you actually listen to what we're saying to you, we're saying very clearly, and David's saying it very clearly, make sure you're prepared, make sure you've got a backup, make sure that you can look after your family. These are the most three important things, and I would probably add one extra to that, and it is make sure you're in a community and you're helping to save that community as well. That's an even more important. Those four are extremely important and should all be together, because I get a lot of comments back from people saying, "Oh, you're fear porn, you're this and that," and I said, "Well, actually, no, I'm not. I'm actually not trying to raise anybody's anxiety levels or kind of stress levels or anything. What I'm trying to do is just to enlighten, hopefully, just one person to the fact that this is going to happen. Mathematically, it is going to happen, and you have to be prepared for it. There's no other way that it can be said. If that's causing you anxiety, then I would suggest that you need to look internally and say, well, why is it causing me anxiety? Because you actually know that it's true. You hope it's not, but it is. And like David said, it's a massive normalcy bias way to look at things, is to get you're anxious for a reason. What's the reason you're anxious? Well, the reason you're anxious because you realize that this is actually real. It's going to happen, but you don't want to admit to it because of your normalcy bias. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I don't want to belabor the point too far, but so let's just forget gold and silver. Let's just take the average person that's, you know, almost living paycheck to paycheck, but, you know, they can cut back and they can make some better, you know, decisions with their money. I mean, just let's say put back 2 weeks worth of food, okay? Now that's a zero lose bet. I mean, you're going to have to eat. So if you buy things that you normally eat outside of fresh stuff that will spoil, but I'm talking canned goods and, you know, powdered milk or whatever. I'm not going to give you a shopping list, but you know what I'm talking about. Stuff you're really going to eat, and you bought extra of it. So let's say that this financial situation muddles on even longer than I expect it to. But there's a rain damage, or there's a hurricane, or there's some neighbor that's down in their luck, and you can give them the food. I mean, it's a zero lose bet. So put on your adult clothes and think for a minute. This is a zero lose bet. There's nothing that can go wrong by having extra food put away. Nothing. And so, you know, when people get the fear porn and, you know, all this conspiracy or whatever, I mean, you know, I don't have a very strong Boy Scout background, but I was in the Scouts for a while, and, you know, it's always be prepared. You know, you need to prepare. Life has these moments that we've all experienced, emotionally or otherwise, that take us down for a while. And so, you know, again, it's just looking at the very basics. But I hate the argument that, you know, it's that there's, you know, it's stupid or something to do. So no, it's only prudent to do it, and it's a no-lose bet. Those are my final words.
I've said this before, and I'll say it again, actually. Use the terminology grandma's pantry, because if you're in my generation, and probably yours, David, I used to go into my grandma's pantry and it was stocked. It was full of food. There was no time I went in there and there wasn't canned foods, or it wasn't stocked. And the reason for that is because that generation went through the Second World War, and they soon learnt a valuable lesson as regards to not being prepared for the Second World War, because after that, every single one of them, bar none, always had stock. You know, their pantries were stocked to the brim, because they always, my grandma used to say, you never know what's coming around the corner. And that's a very good terminology to remember. You never know what's coming around the corner.
Well, that's the other point. I said I'd stop, but I need to add this, because everything's based on the just-in-time inventory principle, which means there aren't any warehouses full of food. Yeah, there's warehouses that are dumped off in these major cities but the warehouses are basically the trucks on the road.
Yeah.
The trucks on the road are the warehouse. So everything just comes in the last possible minute. and then it gets on your store shelves. But there aren't any really big warehouses that hold all, an abundance of food for everybody. So what happens if there's a problem with the trucking industry, or there's a strike with the truckers, or there's some problem with the electrical grid, or any of these things? Possibilities. Again, I'm not trying to make a fear point. I'm just trying to get people to think it through. But what I am explaining is that it's more vulnerable now than it was in your grandmother's era or my grandmother's era.
Yep.
Because they used to basically warehouse food, and now they don't. So anything could go wrong just with the food supply. It could also be a communication problem, an electrical problem, or a transportation problem that exacerbates the problem for everybody. The other part of it is that in our grandmother's era, the economy might have been, 30-40% agrarian, or maybe 20%. I don't know. I'd have to look at the data, but I know back in the 30s it was about 40% agrarian. So what that means is you had probably someone in your community that you knew that actually grew food, but that's not the case anymore. So this problem with a complex society and normalcy bias is that most people will just, troll us, and the trolls will say these guys are nuts or whatever they say. But again, once the ship is sunk, people are going to say, geez, I could have listened or whatever. And again, it doesn't harm you in any way to put back something, especially if it's food you like. That's something I kind of want to stress. I mean, people, believe you and me, and, so they buy some packaged food product off the internet. And there's some that are pretty good, and I use it myself because I'm a bit lazy, although I do put back foods that I actually use all the time, too. I do both. But you don't have to spend a great deal of money to prepare properly.
No. I've said that countless times. It's not a break-the-bank scenario. David, I'd just like to show people this LIBOR chart that I sent to you yesterday as well, and we'll go through that if you don't mind. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this chart here, which shows the Fed balance sheet, the Dow, and the LIBOR. Now, I'll get David to expand on the LIBOR a little bit more because there's another article that I want to show in a second after David's speaking about LIBOR, which was a very good article, which was in the Australian on the weekend. The West Australian. And the dynamics of the LIBOR are something that a professional person like David could expand on better than myself. But the reason I'm showing you this chart is because the LIBOR is what is the interbank lending rate. Now, if you follow that down, the blue line, it's literally diving off a cliff, folks. There's no other way to say it. While the Dow is going up, the LIBOR is going down, and the Fed balance sheet is actually going down. That LIBOR going down while everything else is going up is an extremely worrying sign, and I'll get David to expand on it.
Okay. Well, as you know, it's officially called the Intercontinental Exchange London Interbank Offered Rate. But basically, it's a short-term loan bank to bank. And right now, that article that you sent me the day before talks about a shortage of dollars. Now, that sounds like, well, how can it be a shortage of dollars when all David and Prep talk about is how many dollars are out there? But there's dollars of different denominations. What does that mean? Now, I'm not talking about ones, fives, tens, and 20s. What I'm talking about is durations, which means there's a T-bill, which is very short. There's the note, which is 10 years, and there's the bond, which is like 30 years. So a lot of this money is borrowed short and lent long, which means that they've loaned a lot of their money, quote unquote money, their currency out for a very long time, like 10 years or 30 years. And yet they have to borrow instantly overnight. And so there's a big demand for dollars, and there isn't that big a supply. So you're starting to see this interest rate bid up the price. So like anything in the market, especially in a really free market, is that when there's a high demand for something, it bids the price up. Well, interest rates are a reflection of how much of a demand there is for money. Money is a commodity, or it used to be gold and silver, but I digress to come back. Even in today's currency-only world, money still could be considered a commodity for this thought experiment. So as the pressures come on the Australians to service debt that they've encumbered on themselves to borrow in dollars, and now they have to start paying back dollars, and there's more and more people that aren't only Australians, but there are other countries have to pay back dollars. They have to buy dollars to do it. And if there's a lot of buying out there for dollars, it causes the price to go up. And what's the price? The price is the interest rate. And this is something that the Federal Reserve doesn't control. A lot of people think that the Fed controls the interest rates. They control the discount window. The discount window is what the Fed sets for banks to borrow from the Federal Reserve Bank. But they can't control the market interest rate. And this is what LIBOR is all about. Now, LIBOR has been messed with. I don't really want to go down that rabbit hole because of, it'll take too long to explain. Because like I started with this interview, there's so much algorithmic, that's a big word. There's so many computers talking to each other, making these trades with no human interaction whatsoever, that a lot of things can be done with biases in these, what's called not quantitative easing, but these mathematical geniuses that write these large programs, which are called algorithms, that make things happen. So I digress a bit, but hopefully I explain that because, and let me add on to that, because when you asked me this question, I anticipated it. Something that most people will not believe at all, and I'm about to tell you, you can look it up, don't believe me. But during the Weimar Republic's hyperinflation, you know what the cry was all the way up? There's not enough money. Think about that. The whole time they were hyperinflating, the cry was not enough money. And yet it ended where the value of the currency became its intrinsic value, which means what it could be burned at. Because paper burns quite well and it gives off heat. And that's called BTUs, a British thermal unit. And that's what happened. That money was burned in furnaces in some factories to keep the factory warm because it had reached its intrinsic value, which, as Voltaire says, is zero, but I maintain it actually has some purpose as a heat source.
Yep, well, that's actually amazing because you just showed us a what was it, $100 trillion from Zimbabwe.
Yep.
So people need to understand what you just said, because if you're showing me, and I know for a fact, because I've got a lot of Zimbabwean mates, I know for a fact that they can go to Zimbabwe and live like a king on UK pounds and even Australian dollars. And, if you're smart enough, you'll take American dollars with you because you can just about buy the country for $100. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. So that point is very, very valid. And I hope people understand that.
Prep, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I did an interview with a fairly large coin dealer at the time. They're no longer in business, but that's another story. But he had a chart, or actually he had a display of the Zimbabwe dollar, and I forget the dates. But at one time, $1 US was equivalent to $1 Zim dollar.
Yeah.
And then he explained, I think it was a year and a half, it went from 1 to 1 to 10 to 1 to 100 to 1 to 1,000 to 1, whatever. How fast it's accelerated, which goes back to the point I've been making over and over again on your program here. But it's fascinating. So what I want to say is I'll try and dig that out from my YouTube channel and send you the link. And it's only about a 3-minute video, so it might be worthwhile in the show notes to let your viewers have a look at that because it's fascinating. Because people think that it takes forever or whatever, and it's just a demonstration of how quickly this thing can take place.
Well, for me, I don't know about anyone else, but it's obviously a scary thought if the Australian dollar ended up being, 100 trillion Australian dollars literally in months.
Well, let me interrupt you again. I'm sorry, but there in advanced capital markets, which means basically the Anglo-American Empire's banking system. There's sort of a self-regulating thing that takes place. As I just explained a bit ago, I hope people got at least the gist of it. So when you loan money along for 30 years or even 10 years. That's the bond market, the debt markets that people like myself and Bill Holter are so concerned about. But if the dollar starts to be in demand, as we just talked about, and interest rates by the marketplace, not by the Fed, are moved up and up and up, and what happens to bond prices is they go down and down and down and down, which means you're contracting the money supply, which means that dollars become more valuable. It's deflationary effectively. And this is why I don't expect to see like a hyperinflation with the U.S. dollar. Because if interest rates went up for a thought experiment, let's say to 10%, I don't think it could ever make it that far without crashing the system. But at some point, interest rates would be so high that the bond market would start to cave to such a degree that it would basically take care of a lot of the debt. In other words, the bond market would crash. And what a crash is that stock that was worth $100 is now worth $1. Same thing for the bond market. That bond that you have that's, $100,000 is now worth 1,000 or something. I'm using extremes. To get people to think. I'm not saying that's the exact number. I'm just trying to give you the numbers to get you to think properly.
Yeah.
So that's a big contraction in the money supply. So again, repeat, and hopefully I'm making the point is I don't see a true hyperinflationary blow off in the G20 or the G7 as a minimum. However, that doesn't mean you wouldn't have a currency failure. You certainly could. And basically, I think it'll be led by the debt markets. I'm pretty sure Bill Holter says the same thing.
Yeah.
Basically, again, the same basic principle. And that is, I'd rather have something in hand now that has value than something that's going to pay me something a day from now, a week from now, 2 weeks from now, 10 years from now, or 30 years from now. I don't trust it anymore. And once you've lost confidence, because it's a huge con game, it's a huge confidence game. Once confidence is gone, it can't be rebuilt. That's why going back earlier to the, Donald J. Trump thought experiment, where you replace this debt and wipe it out and start again with a new currency that's based on the full capacity of, let's say, the U.S. citizenry, where the Treasury is the one that is in charge of it, and not some banking consortium, that could work. I'm not a big paper money guy, as you know, but I have to be intellectually honest. As long as there's a direct correspondence between the amount of paper and the amount of goods and services out there, in theory, it would work.
Yeah, good points, very good points. Well, David, look, there was an interesting article in the West Australian, as I said, and everybody, I'll put it in the description box after the interview so you can actually read it. But the actual reason I'm bringing it up, there's two reasons. One, it's one of the very few articles that I've seen lately that is actually true, and it's one of the few articles that's ever been written about what's actually going on in the financial markets at present. And that's why I wanted to speak about the LIBOR. So you really need to read that article at the end of this interview to understand what's going on. But David, did you just want to tell people, as regards to LIBOR, just how close we came to there being the big crash again in 2008?
Yes, I'd be happy to. This is going to sound extreme. There's been a couple of documentaries that pretty much verify what I'm about to say, but the whole premise of this debt-based monetary system globally is based on confidence. And what happened in the 2008 crisis was basically based on mortgages. And you can look at The Big Short and get a better understanding of these really crappy mortgages that were packaged and promoted to be AAA, in other words, ultra safe, and they were not. So there was a lie going on in the system. But bigger than that, what happened was that there was a total, complete, 100% absolute loss of confidence bank to bank, which means that Bank A didn't trust Bank B's paper. So they had all this stuff, these notes and these mortgages and the securities and the securitized thing and all the bank paper that banks use that most people don't even understand, but the bankers understand. And no bank was trusting any other bank, so the system was coming down to zero, which means monies weren't flowing. It's like a river that all of a sudden stopped. And what that means is that the ATMs are not going to put out any cash. You couldn't go in the bank and cash a check. You couldn't do anything. Now that's the extreme. That did not take place, but it came very, very close. What saved the system was that the Federal Reserve came in quickly, and this had to be done quickly, and said, Bank A, you don't trust Bank B's paper. You're not going to do any business at all with them. And Bank B said, I'm not trusting Bank A's paper. I'm not going to do any business with them at all. So again, the thing was coming to a halt. So the Fed did something that was, I don't know if I, they did the only thing that they could do. And they look at both Bank A and B, and of course this is, banks around the world, and it's not just two banks. I'm just making it very simple to understand. And they said, well, Bank A, let me take that paper that Bank B doesn't trust, these subprime mortgages, this crap, and give you T-bills for it. And Bank A said, oh, that's awesome. And Bank B, let me take your crap and give you T-bills for it. Basically cash, U.S. dollars. Let's call it U.S. dollars. And that kept the system from crashing, or seizing up is a better word. So that's what happened. Now, people don't really understand how close we came, but we came close. There was actually an electronic run on the banks, and that people that had money in money market accounts were moving it, and they were basically taking their money home with them, so to speak, as a metaphor, but they were getting out of the system. And this was taking place rapidly. So these banks did act very, very rapidly to forestall what could have been a complete seizing up of the system, where no bank trusts any other bank, and that no flows of funds would take place whatsoever. And once that happens, look out. And maybe I could add on to that. Of course, this is going to sound like fear porn, but just it's a thought experiment. Not only did that take place, but that could take place in another way, which is the electronic transfer system, which means if you had an event of some type, be it man-made or nature-made, where you had a large money center bank where there was some problem with the electronic funds transfers, that could have a rippling effect. In other words, you had an electrical grid outage from whatever the cause. And it wouldn't have to be global at all. It could just be one or two large money center banks where no clearing could take place. And there's provisions for that. I don't want to say, well, David said, and if that happened, then New York couldn't clear it all, go to St. Louis, and everything drives on. I'm saying this, these people have thought it through to a large degree, but not maybe not to the extent that most people believe or hope. And also, again, we got a lot closer to the edge of the cliff than most people realize.
What's the what are the comparisons? Look, we hear this a lot from people, in your industry, and from interviews that are held, that there was nothing was fixed, everything is still the same. It's just that the debt's gotten bigger.
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, Carl Denninger did an interview with a friend of mine that does a channel like yours, and he explained that as the interest rates go down and down, most of these corporations, like the oil industry, for an example, I mean, BP and Shell and all these big oil conglomerates, basically, all they ever worry about is servicing the debt. So if they've got an open credit line, it's called, which means they're chummy with their banking buddies, and they have $1 billion that they've got to service, and the interest rates, at 5%, then it takes so much to service that debt, and that's how much they borrow. But if interest rates drop to 2.5%, they can borrow twice as much, and they do, which means that they have more leverage in the system. And then if interest rates go from 2.5% to 1.25%, which they've done, then they can borrow twice as much money again. And so the system is over-leveraged more than it was in 2008. Interest rates have come down to ridiculous levels and starting to ratchet up now in the U.S., but there's some, I forget the number, but there's trillions of dollars out there in government issues, in other words, bonds or debt, that are negative interest rates. I mean, this is absolutely uncharted waters that's never been recorded in all of monetary history, where you give a bank your money for 10 years guaranteed to get back less. I mean, this is insanity, but yet this is what's taking place. So we are more levered than are geared, as the Brits say, than we ever have been before. And the exposure to the problem has not been resolved at all. It's only been increased. So the next law, there aren't going to be any bailouts. There'll be bail-ins. So if you have any money in the bank that you think is your money, you better think again, because it's not. It's the bank's money, not yours. So if there is another crisis, the first thing that's going to happen is whatever funds you think will happen, you won't have the Argentina problem where your bank says your money's still here, but you can only take out $300 a week. It's just going to either disappear or half it will disappear. There'll be some edict about how it is. If you have over 200,000 and they own it all or whatever, they'll come up with some whatever. But it's not going to be in your favor. I can guarantee you that.
Never is. That's a classic statement. It never is in our favour, is it? I'd like to just say ask you two things. I say to people, if you're looking at the world trading economics or websites, veer away from the traditional and go and look at the emerging markets and see what's happening in the emerging markets around the world at the moment, because they are absolutely getting slaughtered, in my opinion, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. And, maybe you can give an opinion on that, but I'd also like to ask you, in your mind, where is the tipping point for you? What's going to be the thing that David Morgan's going to go, whoa, hang on, this has become very, very serious real quick? And that's your moment where you're out, you're not even doing interviews anymore. You're out chopping wood, making sure you've got enough firewood for the next 3 years, sort of thing.
Yeah, wow, that's a good one. I think you asked me two questions. I remember the last one, so I'll answer that first. This isn't for me, and I actually do not remember who came up with it, but it's called the Misery Index. And the Misery Index is defined by whoever this gentleman was as 2 times the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate. He's talking about the United States. Again, there's nothing real special here. I'm not trying to be, rah USA. I'm just saying that the reserve currency is the US dollar. So it's twice the inflation rate plus the unemployment rate. If that reaches 50, he said it's all over. Now, there's no proof in this whatsoever, but it is a good metric. So the inflation rate, it's hard to know the exact one, but if you use John Williams, shadowstats.com, and I've known John for years, I think it's currently around 8%, the real inflation rate, not the government mandated, hawked up, ridiculous numbers that all the governments put out. So 2 times 8 is 16%. And of course, the official unemployment rate is, I don't know what it is, 4 something, very low, and all the politicians, Trump himself, was taking credit for how low. But the true unemployment rate is somewhere around 22%. I think Trump actually said that or something close to it during the campaign. So I'm just doing this big arithmetic problem here on a pad of paper. So that's at 38. So when do I get worried? I'd say the unemployment will be a result of the crash as it's crashing, meaning as businesses start to fold, they first lay off, some employees, and then they see they can't make it, they just fold up the business. That's a quick example. Not all these businesses are going to fail. So I would look at the inflation rate. So the inflation rate, and the true inflation rate, not the government-sponsored Ministry of Truth number. I'm talking about the real one. And this is already happening. I mean, going to the emerging markets was your first comment. Yeah, what's happened is basically everyone's saying, like I said in the hyperinflation, there's not enough money, all the way up as they're printing more. So people are cash starved globally. I mean, there's like the super elite, ultra rich, and everybody else. The middle class in a lot of countries has been wiped out. Many countries don't have a middle class. unworld enough travel to know that. And so people, like in the States, I mean, the cost of food has gone up. It's gone up very, very noticeably. And that's something that's, critically important for everyone. So they have less what's called disposable income. And the disposable income goes for a lot of products that come from the emerging markets, a spiffier phone or a new piece of software or a new laptop or, some item that isn't really a need. So as things get tighter and tighter on the individual, there's a lot more about buying only what you need and not stuff that you want, that useless piece of stuff that you don't look at 6 months later and say, why did I buy it? That's being, put on to people directly or indirectly. It's a result of the contraction of the purchasing power of money globally. So that's the reason for that. So that's what I'm looking at. I'd say once the inflation rate, the official rate, gets up to like 5 or 6%, then the true inflation rate would probably be 12 or 13, like it was in 1979. And 2 times that's 25. We got a 22% or 25% employment rate. That's about it. So that's where I would probably say, in theory, where I would be looking. And you, again, want to be ahead of the game. You want to be prepped up before that happens. And people will, just you can't define psychology, or you cannot predict human behavior 100% of the time. You can predict human behavior quite often, but under normal conditions. Once the psychology changes and people go, oh my God, I've got to prepare, or I'm seeing use the word prepare, oh my God, I didn't prepare, and now I've got to do something. When that psychology takes hold, look out, because that's when the doors get busted on the grocery stores, or the department stores, or whatever, and people start acting absolutely like animals because they're so full of fear that they're, not going to eat, or they're not going to get ever. And this is going to happen, and the answers on a global basis, I doubt it. But it's already happened in areas that people are unaware of. I mean, again, going back to the book I wrote so many years ago, I think it's about 5 years ago, the Silver Manifesto. I mean, there's a whole chapter in there about what happens in some of these currency crises in these small countries that no one pays any attention to. But those are as valid a human being as anybody anywhere else on the planet. And it does take place. So you can, research it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Just, take some time away from your iPhone and start looking at this.
Yeah, I could actually say to people, if you want to find anything scary about what's coming, go back as far as you can and look at Venezuela. Look at what's happened in Venezuela over the last 10 years. It's not even 10 years, in the last 5 years. It's become a wrecking ball society, and it's it's verging on the edge of complete anarchy. They've eaten all the animals out of zoos. It's just incredible. There's no horses. They've eaten them all. Dogs get killed, cats, anything that is actually edible is being eaten. And you would hate to think that there's actually cannibalism going on there, because people are that desperate. It's that bad. And people, like you just said, get off your iPhone and go on YouTube and find videos of what's going on in Venezuela while you're sitting down to your steak dinner, because it's exactly as I said, the emerging markets are really copping it, and we're not even recognizing that fact. It's just bizarre. Frustrating at best. Yeah, sorry. But I said about the emerging markets. Are you seeing the emerging markets collapsing even more than before, or is it just a plateau at the moment before the big fall, or are they at such a level now that's, it's not really relevant to what's going to happen anyway?
Well, if I understood your question, I think that they're at a plateau currently and that they're going to get worse. But that's, again, as you asked me earlier, when, and that's based on interest rates primarily, or confidence. Either confidence is lost and the panic mode hits, and that can't be predicted when. If you do it theoretically as when things get bad enough to where the misery index hits 50, which is my friend's theoretical point of no return, and I think it's a good wag, good guess, and that's with inflation up probably inflation at 6-7%. I think I said 5 before. There's no perfect point. Oh, David, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
Again, because it comes back to psychology. It's when people start saying, as I've said 3 or 4 times, when I say I'd rather take this, these Australian dollars and start buying peanut butter and laundry detergent and some nails and another hammer. I'd rather have that than these pieces of paper. When that psychology hits, if it hits, and I believe it could, then that's the time where you don't have much time, because that's when the stores get wiped out. Just like in a hurricane, most people wait to the last minute to get the warning, and they don't do anything. And then, oh my God, look at the rain. Oh, look at the wind. I better get down to the store. By the time they get down there, it's too late. There's nothing on the shelves.
Yeah, the store's gone.
The
store's blown away. Yeah, that's a very good point. We'll say one more thing and then we'll wrap it up. But people seem to have very short-term memory loss, because you mentioned something earlier. In 79 and 80, the interest rates in America were 12% or something like that. Well,
actually up to 17.5, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that was the same here. But credit card interest rates, and I want to make sure everyone understands this, because this is a big one. Credit card interest rates here in Australia went to 33% on some credit cards, and even higher on other credit cards. That's the main credit cards I'm talking about. MasterCard and Visa went to 33%. So you've got your house mortgage, but you've also, you've effectively got 2 mortgages in your hand. If that credit card interest rate starts to take off, then what are you going to do about it? That's one of the big things that you're going to have to keep an eye on, because that will quickly smother you if the interest rates take off like they did last time in the 80s. And I was working with people in the 80s who were washing dishes, or who had to go and wash dishes, to actually make ends meet. You know what I mean? Their job was gone and they were going to lose their house. Some of them pulled through, some of them didn't. And I will tell you for a fact that a lot of those people crashed because of the fact that their credit card bill was so high that they just couldn't manage it. They could have managed their mortgage money because interest rates in their houses went up to, it was 18%. So, it's just another thing to keep an eye on, folks. Just remember, we're here to enlighten you. We're not here to scare you. We're not here to fear porn you. We're actually here to tell you the truth. So if you don't want to hear that, then you shouldn't be watching this show. But these are the things. And remember, it only happened in 1980. So it's only 28 years ago what we're talking about. But people still have short-term memory loss as regards to that. But if you speak to people my age, we all remember it very, very well. Very well.
Yeah, well, I was, in my mid-20s in that era. And I think that's an extremely important part. This is one of 2 points that we've talked about during the whole show that I think is the most important. I think people need to know that they need to be debt-free as they possibly can. Now, most people think in an inflation or a hyperinflation especially, it's great to owe a lot of money because it's becoming worthless and you just pay it off. The problem is your wages have to be, they have to ride along with the inflation. And if they don't, then you're in big trouble, which is what you just outlined. So I teach most people that I work with to, if you have a mortgage, that's fine. I'm nothing against debt if it's used properly, but have a fixed rate one. And everything else, be able to pay it off. And really, any credit card thing, I'm just not in favor of it, unless you have to. I mean, we all start somewhere. I mean, when I got out of school, it wasn't like I had any savings. But the point being is you really want a low debt, even in an inflationary environment, for the reason you just outlined. The interest rates could go up and there's a decrease in employment. You got a job. Let's say you're in a job that actually does have a cost of living adjustment. So your wages go up and up and up and up along with the inflation. First, you're just going to get break even maybe if you're lucky. But secondly, the employment's going to go down. And so you might be one of those that gets laid off, you know. So, I mean, it's really, there's always a good reason to live within your means. It really is.
Yeah. Very good point, mate. Well, look, okay, ladies and gentlemen, well, as usual, we'll finish on the Lord's Prayer. And honestly, if you listen to anything that David said, then now's a good time to start, making sure you would start preparing spiritually. As I said, I'm not a religious person, but I just think that there's a little bit of God's kingdom in every one of us. And we all have to do our best to try and find it and promote it. So, the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
Well, David, thanks for coming back and doing the interview for me. It's been much appreciated. I've enjoyed having you on. Hopefully everyone else has enjoyed you. I know they will because we had a big showing last time. And good luck for the future for all of us. That's all I can say.
Yeah. Well, once you're prepared, I mean, you just kind of got to put it in God's hands, in my opinion. I mean, these things have happened before. There's been financial upheavals really more often than most people know because it doesn't affect everybody the same way. But this one, I think, will be one for the record books, and that's going to basically reverberate around the planet, and therefore probably will affect almost everybody, just like the Great Depression in the 30s did. It affected almost everyone. So I think that's what we're looking at. But, the human spirit is a wonderful thing, and it's going to have a lot to do with your attitude. I mean, there'll be people that have large gold holdings that maybe not be able to cope psychologically with what's going on, and people that basically prep with food only and have a great skill and have a great personality and really get along with others and that type of thing that will come out, fairly well or whatever. So I think it's going to be a demand on people that we haven't seen in a very, very long time. And I'm a true believer that this kind of pressure brings out the best in most people. Not to say that there won't be areas that will be under extreme stress and we'll bring out the worst in people. I'm not that naive to think that everyone's going to be, putting their best foot forward. And that's why you really want to not only prepare with what we talked about, but you want to get your spiritual house in order and make sure that you have a community of people that you know and trust. That's something that we all, and there's no time like the present for that. That's for sure.
Well said. And on that note, mate, we'll leave it all. I will put the links to the Morgan Report and the Silver Manifesto at the end of in the video in the description box for you, David. Thank you again. God bless, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. God bless you as well, and thank you for the time.